All right, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Professor Chris French, who is the head of the Animalistic Psychology Research Unit in the Psychology Department at Goldsmiths University of London. Additionally, he's a fellow of the British Psychological Society and of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And lastly, he's the author of many articles and books where his research focuses on the psychology of paranormal beliefs and anomalous experiences. So, Professor French, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So, when did you first get interested in psychology and the paranormal?
Phew, but even as a child, I was kind of fascinated with the kind of paranormal stuff, very much from a believer's perspective. I mean,
Okay.
as a child, I was absolutely terrified of ghosts. Yeah, the
Sure.
idea of ghosts is something that kind of used to keep me awake at night. Um, I suppose I grew out of that childhood fear. Oh, easily by the age of 27. No, but it took me a while actually. I had to sleep with a nightlight until a lot longer than I should have done. But yeah, I did grow out of it. I mean, and then choosing psychology as a degree subject wasn't particularly related to my interest in the paranormal at the time. It seemed like an interesting topic to do. We didn't actually cover any of this kind of material in my degree course.
Hmm.
It was when I was doing my PhD at Leicester University, and that was in a completely different kind of area. This was, you know, this was looking at the kind of difference between the two cerebral hemispheres using kind of EEG, and it's all very scientific. Um, and a friend of mine in the department, just recommended a particular book that he'd just read and enjoyed. It was called Parapsychology, Science or Magic. And it was the first kind of skeptical treatment of any of this stuff that I'd ever actually come across. So by a guy called James Alcock. And it was a kind of life-changing moment for me looking back. I suddenly realized that there were kind of alternative explanations for the weird experiences that people have. And I kind of found the arguments that he was putting forward very convincing. And so this opened up a whole new world of skepticism for me. Um, I kind of realized that there were skeptical books out there if you knew where to look, and skeptical magazines. I mean, in particular, the Skeptical Inquirer was something
Yeah.
which I hadn't even been aware of before. So I started to subscribe to that, and a kind of a British publication, initially called him the British and Irish Skeptic, but subsequently just became Skeptic magazine, not to be confused with Michael Shermer's Skeptical
Right.
magazine,
Yeah.
which is a completely different publication. But that had just come out as well, so I was subscribing to that. Um, we've got a thing over here in the UK called Skeptics in the Pub,
Ah,
and it's basically a monthly meeting in a pub where they have a speaker, and then Q&A, and you can socialize. That started. So there's a lot of things happening around about the same time looking back, but it was still very much a kind of side interest. It was a hobby. When I started at Goldsmiths, that was 1985. I did a couple of lectures, very much from a kind of skeptical perspective on parapsychology and the paranormal. And I enjoyed teaching it. The students enjoyed it, whether they were believers or skeptics. It was an interesting topic. And then about 10 years later, I realized that I could put on a whole module on this stuff, parapsychology, pseudoscience, etc., which again I did for many, many years. And I was beginning to just publish little papers here and there. I was I was actively discouraged from putting all of my efforts into the psychology of weird stuff. My head of
okay.
department at the time pretty much made it clear that my interest in this area would be tolerated but not encouraged, as provided that I carried on doing more scientifically respectable research, which I
Interesting.
did for a long time. I had a kind of twin track. But eventually got to a point where I realized that this was the stuff that really interested me the most. It was probably also more what I was kind of known for. If I was known for anything, I could
Sure.
either, be a little fish in a big ocean of respectable research, or a big fish in a small pond of this very specialized area. Um, and I wish I'd kind of decided earlier to just focus on what I now call anomalistic psychology. But yeah, I'm glad I did, and it's kind of it's been interesting. It's been fun.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's worked out, and it is so interesting. I think how a lot of people kind of get involved with the skeptic community. How many people start out by having maybe some beliefs in the stuff that they're now skeptical of, or just kind of got into it because they're thought it was strange that so many people believe in this and they're not sure why, and they're looking for sort of material like skeptical inquiry or something to kind of feel like you're not totally alone being skeptical
Yeah,
of such a
yeah,
topic. That's kind of how I first came across this stuff. I remember just because I grew up in a very religious area in the United States, in Kansas, and what kind of they call the Bible Belt of the United States.
right.
A part of the country where there's a church almost every block near town, and so
Yeah,
um, and I think for me it was always just kind of interesting to interact with all these people and then kind of reflect on it later and wonder, okay, I'm not really believing in this stuff a lot, so I'm curious to see if there's other people that are writing about this topic, and finding these skeptic magazines or whatnot is always kind of cool in that regard. So
so, I mean, did you ever believe in any of the paranormal stuff, or even any of the religious stuff for that matter?
no, not really. I mean, I kind of it's interesting. I came from a family that was we attended church growing up, but it was more for like the community aspect. My Neither one of my
Right.
parents were particularly religious. My mom was more so than my dad. But for the most part, my family has always been pretty I would say kind of skeptical of it, or just kind of agnostic about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I never came from a background where I was a diehard believer in anything or at all. I mean, I remember asking questions to my dad growing up about like religion or paranormal beliefs, and he would always just kind of say like, yeah, I mean, there's a no, yeah, no one really has any evidence for any of these things. So if you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, you don't. So
fair
um,
enough. Yeah,
yeah, but
I think
yeah, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think it takes kind of probably takes a lot more courage to come out as an atheist in America than it does over here. I
Probably,
mean,
yeah. It
I
could
mean, I
be.
don't, did you get any pushback yourself, or did you just keep it to yourself? Did you not tell people?
I mean, yeah. I mean, for me, and it was something like I never in my entire life ever like labeled myself as being a particular segment of like an atheist or agnostic. Um, I kind of just embraced the idea of like I just like to kind of think critically about these things, and I don't want to necessarily be put in a box.
Yeah,
Because also I do think that it is true, especially in the US today, I think it's become more so this way where you're either you're the non-religious, you're like an atheist, or you're a Christian, or, some other religion. And that kind of breaks down conversations between people kind of
right.
automatically. And so for me, I never really wanted to label myself because I want to be open for people to talk
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah.
um, and I'm just kind of like, for me, it's just fascinating because as a historian, I look at the history of these religions and how they came about, and the history of all beliefs, and a great way of understanding where this comes from and being able to study it is by being able to have conversations with people that believe it or don't believe it, and kind of take all this information in and kind of make sense of what's going on here in the world, and how human beings kind of interact with this world. So
No, I think that's it. I think you kind of highlighted the difference there between America and Britain
yeah,
insofar as over here it's not a big deal if you're an atheist. I
yeah,
mean, it's not going to stop the conversation. If you're
sure,
at a dinner party or down at the pub and you were with people who were all religious believers and you said, "Oh well, no, I'm an atheist actually," that's fine. They wouldn't it wouldn't kind of upset them, and so you can still have those kind of the conversation continues. I mean, I know in some areas in America, particularly the southern states, it's
yeah,
you're
yeah,
really kind of likely to get some pushback if you
yeah.
declare
I
atheism.
mean, yeah,
It
the
doesn't
deep
happen over here.
South, I imagine it would be a little odd even today. I mean, the number of people that are coming out as atheists in the U.S. is much higher than it's ever been.
Yeah, yeah,
So in a city or anything, it wouldn't be so strange. But there has been kind of a lot of I guess what's been confusing for a lot of people is that sort of what your religious identity is or non-religious identity is oftentimes overlaps with political identities in the
Yeah.
country. And so, as soon as you label yourself as something, then all these other factors kind of get tied to it,
Yeah.
because America is just such a polarized country politically.
But yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so yeah,
we've got that. I think to a lesser extent. I mean, we've had the same kind of thing. I mean, there's an awful lot of, automatically that if somebody supported Brexit,
yeah, that's right.
that kind of makes them the kind of equivalent of being a Trump supporter in America,
Yes, yeah,
and a lot goes along with that. But yeah, but no, I mean, yeah, going back to what we were talking about, the whole kind of psychology of belief, and particularly, I suppose, those beliefs that are not supported by evidence, or even
hmm
the more extreme versions where the evidence quite clearly shows that the belief is wrong, and yet people still cling to those beliefs. That's obviously, from a psychological point of view, absolutely fascinating. Trying to get
yeah.
to the bottom of what's going on there.
Oh yeah, I mean it is, and I think it's just incredibly humbling too, just be able to feel confident enough to not know something that you're able to look at evidence. I think people are so afraid of you know of examining something critically that they have to have the answer ahead of time. They have to have a belief ahead of
Yeah,
time, and like that's the whole fun of investigating these things, that you don't come in necessarily with this sort of bias when you're examining an issue. And I think that's what makes it so fun and interesting, also empowering, because I think I feel much more secure about myself when I don't pretend to know something versus
yeah,
someone who's constantly trying to, make their belief valid.
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, again, having said all that, and I'm totally, totally in agreement
sure.
with you on all that. It's also, I think it's kind of also useful and helpful to be aware of the fact that even we people who value critical thinking,
Oh
we've
yes.
still got those biases.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's just that we be a little bit more of them, and maybe that means all, no doubt at all. I mean, I'm aware on any particular topic within the world of the paranormal, I will know much more about the kind of skeptical arguments about the evidence against than I will about the arguments on the other side. I'll be familiar with the
Sure.
arguments on the other side. I'd have to be in order to engage with, that topic. But say we all have those biases, and it's kind of useful. And the other thing that you kind of mentioned implicitly there is kind of not being afraid to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I love it when people say, I don't know. It's a recognition that,
Yeah.
there are things that we just don't know. We just have to live
Right.
with ambiguity. And also when people change their minds in the face of evidence,
Yes.
which again is something you can't do in the world of politics, of course, because if you do that, well, you're flip-flopping, you're kind of wishy-washy, you don't know what you're talking about,
Yep.
which is
That's true.
nonsense.
Yep.
When the evidence changes, you change your mind. But yeah, I was again, for me, being a proper skepticism is just about show me the evidence, as you said before,
Yeah.
not having decided in advance what the answer is, and then being willing to change your mind if the evidence goes against your cherished hypothesis.
Yeah. I mean, that's the ideal way of trying to examine the universe we live in and make sense of it. And from talking to lots of people in the skeptic community like yourself, I mean, it's so many of them I've talked to, would just tell me like, it's not because we don't want something to be true. We're just trying to get to what is most likely to be true based on the evidence.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people who may be critical of people examining the religious beliefs or supernatural beliefs, obviously they want to believe in something so badly because it's part of their identity that they're afraid of something, countering it and saying, well, there's not enough evidence to support your belief. Um, and that kind of, unfortunately for them, can kind of break down conversations if they're very, very afraid of
yeah.
any pushback. So,
Well, I mean, the thing with religion is, I mean, very often faith is valued and doubt isn't. It's
Yes.
kind of it's built in. It's built into the belief system that to even doubt, God or whatever is a sin, and you'll
Right.
go to hell.
Yeah,
So I
that's
mean,
right.
in terms of memes and mimetic theory, it's kind
Yeah.
of it's a good, whereas at least the idealized version of science, it depends on the data. It's never about certainty. It's always about, well, on the basis of the evidence as it now stands, I think this is probably the most likely explanation, but it
Yeah.
could be wrong. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think,
Yeah.
I say, ultimately, it's kind of, I think it's quite a humble position to take. I mean, there are unfortunately quite a lot of scientists around who kind of do proclaim certainty on too many issues, and
Yes.
that's not good.
Yeah.
But there you go.
It
Can't have everything.
that is a problem. I think that, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, one of the main reasons why I always try to like avoid giving myself a label, because I don't really want to be anything. I'd rather just be myself.
Yeah,
And all the, there's so many people that do label themselves that will make big statements out there that it's like, okay, this is almost sounding like a religious person when you're saying this stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it has to be some balance there. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And so I'm curious, with all the investigations you've done and research, what are the types of paranormal beliefs that you've, studied over the years and whatnot?
Yeah, well, it covers a very wide range. I mean, in very general terms, there's kind of two strands, two threads to the research that we've been doing and continue to do. There's the kind of the main strand, which I would call kind of anomalistic psychology, is primarily focused upon trying to see if we can come up with non-paranormal explanations for ostensibly paranormal experiences. And that means that we're interested in things like hallucinatory experiences, the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, false memories, all the ways that our cognitive systems can make us kind of misperceive, misinterpret, misremember in such a way that we might think that the only way you could explain what happened or what I remember as happening is in paranormal terms, but maybe there's not. So we're interested in things like suggestibility. I mean, I think very often skeptics can be kind of, and again, sometimes you have no choice, but that sometimes you're kind of coming up with plausible non-paranormal counter explanations for a paranormal claim. But I think it's much more powerful if you can actually point to evidence that supports your counter explanation.
Yeah.
So we'll do experiments where we look to see whether, okay, can you actually just by suggestion make people misremember things so that they think something's happened when in fact it didn't, and so on and so forth. So we'll do studies that look at that kind of thing. We're also interested in kind of any personality factors that might be related to paranormal belief. There's a whole, I mean, in fact, the textbook that I co-wrote with Anna Stone, that was published in 2014, the approach we took was to take each of the different subdisciplines of psychology and say, well, what can this subdiscipline, what light can it cast on the topics that we're interested in? Because when you stop and think about it, each of the different subdisciplines has something to offer. In developmental psychology, you can talk about children's belief in magic, and how does that develop and how does it change as they get older. You can also look at the same thing in adults. If you think of cognitive psychology, there are so many cognitive biases that we all have. But is it possible that people who believe in the paranormal might have them a bit more strongly than people who don't, and so on? If you think of neuropsychology, you can think of what's happening in the brain when people are maybe having sleep paralysis or a near-death experience or whatever. So again, and that kind of approach, I think, is kind of quite fruitful. Certainly it's served me well. That the kind of lesser strand of our research is directly testing various paranormal claims. And so we've tested all sorts of stuff over the years. We've done tests of dowsing, tests of mediums and psychics, tests of kind of precognitive dreaming, and so on and so forth. So, and each of these things kind of casts some light. I mean, even taking part in which I do sometimes, really atrocious TV series, it can kind of cast light in terms of the lay psychology of what's going on. If you go out with a kind of a ghost hunting group,
Oh yeah.
and you kind of, you're there on the ground watching them in action and thinking, yeah, okay, I can see what's happening there. That,
Yeah.
that can all be kind of quite illuminating as well. So, I mean, in terms of kind of testing paranormal claims, the way you go about it is to start by saying, well, let's be very, very clear about what the claim is, and then let's design a test around that. There's no point in trying to test psychics in terms of something that they don't claim they can do anyway, or they don't claim they could do under certain conditions. You have to kind of bend over backwards to try and make it as likely as possible. If they really did have some kind of gift, they could demonstrate it, and then you do the test. We always get them to sign something in advance to say, this is a fair test of my claim. And then they do the test, they fail the test, and then they decide it wasn't a fair test after all. That's only retrospectively after they've failed the test.
Yes, naturally.
But yeah, so I mean, they say we've got, I think, kind of anomalistic psychology has got kind of something to say about pretty much any kind of paranormal claim or belief that you could think of. When it comes, I'll run through a few examples just to illustrate.
Sure.
I mean, reincarnation claims. There's two general. I put those into two general groups of people who claim they have past life memories. On the one hand, you have people who undergo hypnotic regression. There are people who claim that they can hypnotically regress you back into your past life, and then there are also cases where it's spontaneous past life memories. Kids growing up just start saying weird things that are interpreted as being evidence of some kind of past life. I think in both cases, the answer ultimately, or at least the answer that I find most satisfying, is we're almost certainly dealing with false memories. I mean, in the case of the hypnotic regression cases, I'm 99.9% sure that we're dealing with false memories for all kinds of reasons. One is that, I mean, again, as a historian, this might be a particular interest to you. What you typically get when you hypnotically regress somebody back into a past life is the Hollywood version of life in that place and that era, not the historically accurate version.
Right, of course.
Yeah. And there are even kind of cases of people kind of when they're asked what the date is, they'll say kind of it's 50 AD. Well, they didn't use that system of dating in 50 AD.
That's right.
I think in some cases they probably even say 50 BC, which is even more ridiculous. But if you ask them what the currency of their country is their country at war, who is the ruler of their country, they typically can't answer. It's and there's also, I mean, you can also show that they respond very much to the kind of suggestions that they're given. So, like in one study, they said, what we've found is that when people regress back to their past life, they're always the same gender as they are in this life. And to another group, they said, one of the interesting things we've found is that when we regress people back, they're often of the opposite gender to what they are in this life. And of course, that influenced what then came back,
Right.
So now that's hypnotic regression. I mean, my main experience of the spontaneous cases was taking part in a documentary many years ago where we went to Lebanon and investigated reincarnation claims amongst the Druze, which is a religious sect that's been closed since 1042. They decided no more takers,
Yep.
And that was really interesting because I didn't know what to expect before I went out there at all. I'd read about it, but I'd never done anything even approaching kind of any field research. But without going into the details, when I came back, I was pretty sure that what we've been dealing with there were false memories, kind of spontaneously generated false memories, but false memories nonetheless. So that'd be one example. One of my favorite areas of research is sleep paralysis, because a lot of paranormal claims, particularly those obviously when people report them having weird experiences at night, are explained in terms of sleep paralysis. And that, I mean, with a lot of these things, they become kind of they're interesting topics in themselves, not just in the paranormal context, because most people, I mean, I assume you know what sleep paralysis is, but for any
Um,
listeners that don't, I maybe should
yeah,
say what it is. Yeah.
yes,
Um, in its most basic form, it is simply a temporary period of paralysis that occurs in between sleep and wakefulness, and it's quite common. It, as I say, you're either just going off to sleep or you're just waking up and you realize you can't move, and it lasts a few seconds. You snap out of it, and it's no big deal. You get on with your day. You know, you think that was a bit weird, but you probably don't worry about it. But it can be associated with other symptoms that can make it absolutely terrifying. So you may have a very strong sense of presence. You feel as if there's something, you're sure there's something or someone in the room with you, even though you may not be able to see them or hear them, but they're there and they don't mean you any good at all, you know. But even worse, perhaps, it can be associated with hallucinations, both auditory and visual. So you might hear voices or footsteps, mechanical sounds. You might see lights moving around the room, or demons or monstrous figures just sitting astride your chest, or, you know, it can be absolutely horrendous. And most people, when they have these kinds of episodes, don't opt for a paranormal interpretation. But because it's a relatively common experience, even though it's not a huge percentage of those people who then do opt for the paranormal explanation, that accounts for a lot of claims of being attacked in the night by demons or having a ghostly encounter or whatever.
yeah,
Um, I get sent lots and lots of first-hand accounts, and they are absolutely terrifying. And these are coming from people who've already decided that, yeah, it was this thing called sleep paralysis. I know it's a hallucination, but it's
yeah,
still terrifying because when it's happening, it feels incredibly
yeah.
real.
I mean, that's fascinating to me because so I probably get sleep paralysis about maybe once a month. Um,
Mm,
and it's I've never had any like hallucinations, luckily, though. I mean, maybe very minor sense of just not being totally sure how aware I am consciously of my,
yeah,
like, when I'm in my bedroom or something like that. Because one of the things, I mean, first off, the feeling is horrific. It really does feel bad to not be able to move your body. I
yeah,
feel like I can see sort of my room a little bit, but I'm not entirely sure what's real or what's not exactly.
yeah, yeah,
I feel like I can like sort of wiggle like my hand or something because I'm always trying to wake myself up when I'm in this state because it's not very comfortable. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean it's pretty strange. It's hard to know exactly. My sense of time is totally off when I'm in this, so I'm not sure how long it takes. It feels like it's going on probably much longer than it does. Um, but, yeah, I mean, it's always a game where I mean, it's such an uncomfortable feeling that once I do get up, I try not to fall back asleep because I don't wanna go right
yeah,
back into it.
yeah. Well, that can happen. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I've spoken to people where it'll repeat maybe a dozen times in the
Yeah.
night. And
Yeah.
the other thing that can happen with it is what's called false awakenings. I don't know if you've had this, where you feel as if you have woken up from this experience, and then actually realize that you're still dreaming. You're still in the dream state,
That's
which is
interesting.
really, really horrible.
That
You know,
I may have experienced that, I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, it is strange because I don't know what the science is on, like, how aware someone can be in that state. Um But, I mean, that's very possible that's happened to me before. I'm sure it probably has given it's happened. I mean, I've had it almost my entire life that I've been able to really remember my sleep uh,
right, right,
situation. But yeah, I mean, I remember when it first started happening, I had no idea what was the cause of this. And then I eventually just started just looking up on the internet, like, okay, what is this situation where I'm, partially waking up, but I'm not actually awake enough to move my body. Um,
yeah.
and then I found out sleep paralysis. I was like, wow, this is a strange thing. I wonder if I know any other people that have it. I haven't really met many people that have had sleep paralysis. So
You know, well, I mean, because of my area, you know, if I
I'm sure
ever
you
do
meet all the
talks
time.
and I mention it, and I get the audience to, you know, put your hands up if you ever had sleep paralysis. And yeah, it's interesting trying to figure out just how common it is, because if you read the literature, the estimates vary enormously from a fraction of a percentage point in some, up to, and I'm kidding you not, 65%. Now that is a very big range.
That's a huge range. Yeah.
That is a huge range. And a friend of mine, Brian Sharpless, who is one of the world's leading researchers in this area, he did a study where he tried to get the best estimate that he could. I had for years been saying to my students that typically about 30 to 40% of the population will experience sleep paralysis at least once in their lives. And on the basis of Brian's analysis, it looks like in the general population, it's more like 8%. So, I was kind of quite aware, except for two subgroups. And the two subgroups who are more like 30% are students and psychiatric patients. Now that makes sense when you think about it, because if you've got the underlying disposition, it's much more likely to actually manifest if you have very disrupted, you don't have a good sleep pattern. And of course, two groups with hopefully for different reasons, with very poor sleep patterns are going to be students and psychiatric patients. And of course, I was basing my estimate on the fact that, well, as I say, firstly, there were kind of wildly divergent estimates within the literature, but also we used to give our first years a questionnaire when they started, and it would always come out around about 30 to 40%, so I mean, but it may be that there are real differences between different countries. I don't know. I mean, we know it depends on things like the wording of the question. There was a nice Japanese study where if you ask in terms of have you ever experienced temporary paralysis, which kind of has medical connotations? People were a bit more reluctant to say they'd had it. If you asked about kanashibari, which is the folkloric term for sleep paralysis in Japan, people are much more willing to say, yes, I've had that, so there's all sorts of factors that come in, but most people never experience it. There's no question about that. Most people will never have an episode in their lives. Of those that do, it's usually the mild form. Of those who have the kind of really vivid whistles and bells version, they'll probably only have it maybe once or twice in their lives. But there are some unfortunate individuals who get the really vivid form on a very regular basis, and for them it can become really affects their quality of life. And depending upon who they approach, if they manage to do what you do and kind of realize that there is a scientific and medical literature there, I hope they find that reassuring. You're not, it wasn't UFOs, it wasn't demons, you're not going crazy. It's this thing called sleep paralysis, which, although it can be kind of frightening, is essentially harmless. But if you imagine someone kind of going, basically, because of their belief system, they'll go and turn to their local priest or their local shaman or whatever, then they're much more likely to interpret it as being a spiritual attack, which I'd imagine is more terrifying. I'm trying to put the message out there that, yes, it can be terrifying, but it's essentially harmless, and so the more people that, hear about it and know that there is a scientific and medical literature there, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what it'd be like if I had the very vivid sort of cases as you're describing. That would be pretty strange. Luckily, I don't. I mean, and just the feeling of it in general is kind of scary enough. So I can only imagine
without all the other stuff. I mean, and that's the thing, of course, because even the version that you get, which is relatively mild, but just not being able to move is a frightening thing. And also there is some evidence to support the idea that it may well be that the amygdala, the part of the brain that deals with the fight or flight response, is kind of overactivated during these episodes. So, even people who've been in life-threatening situations will report that the fear they experience during sleep paralysis is orders of magnitude greater than that. It's just it's just kind of pure fear, you know.
Yeah.
And like I say, I get sent lots and lots of first-hand accounts of this stuff, which I never tire of reading. They're absolutely fascinating. But even reading them, it can be quite scary. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of put yourself in the position. Oh my God, you know, and then this happened, and then that happens. You know, yeah, it can be really, really horrible, and it can be so surreal and weird as well.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
there's the famous picture that I'm sure you're familiar with, The Nightmare by Fuseli, of
Yep.
the woman lying on her back with the demon on her
Yes,
chest and
that's right.
the drapes, and it's just a perfect illustration of sleep paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, it is, yeah, it's, I mean, for who knows how long people have been dealing with this issue, it seems like. And I mean, today, obviously, we can, have a scientific discussion about what's going on, but throughout most of human history, people, who knows, how many different sort of paranormal beliefs stemmed from experiences like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, if you look around the world even now, there are dozens and dozens. I mean, again, Brian Sharpless's book. I think he identified about 118 different words from around the world
Wow.
for what looks like sleep paralysis, but each with a kind of different interpretation. So in Newfoundland, they talk about being ridden by the hag. You know, it's the idea is that a hag sits across your chest and tries to throttle you. In Japan, as I said, it's kanashibari, which literally translates as bound by iron. In St. Lucia, it's kokmar, and this is one of my favorites because it's just so creepy. It's the spirits of unbaptized children who crawl onto your chest and throttle you. You know, so do sleep well tonight. You know,
That's right.
I'm saying all this to somebody who's got the underlying susceptibility. I hope you don't have an attack tonight,
That's
and I
right.
hope
If I do, I'll send you an email. Yeah.
yeah, that has happened. I mean, I've had cases of people kind of who've mid-episode thought, they told me this later. They said, and I thought to myself, "Oh, I must tell Chris French about this one." Oh dear, yes.
I mean, I guess the next question is like, so what exactly is happening in the brain that causes situations like this? Is it due partially to, I guess, abnormal sleep schedule or,
I mean, I mean, basically, if you go in a normal night's sleep,
yeah,
you go through a cycle that repeats round about every 90 minutes. So you go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 sleep. And if you were all wired up to the appropriate machines would be able to monitor your brain waves, your heart rate, all breathing rate, and so on. And you can very clearly identify these different stages as you're going deeper and deeper into sleep. And then you come back up out of those and you go into what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And that's the phase of sleep that is typically associated with vivid dreams. And it's when you're in that state that your muscles are actually paralyzed, presumably to stop you acting out the actions of the dream. But with an episode of sleep paralysis, there's a glitch. I'm putting
yeah,
it simply, it's as though, I mean, you said it yourself before, it's as though your brain wakes up, but your body doesn't. And so, you can move your eyes. That's one of the few parts of the body that you can move. So you may well be able to open your eyes. You can see you're in your bedroom, but you can't move. And you may have all this weird dream imagery coming through into normal waking consciousness. And yeah, the end result can be pretty damn terrifying.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that is interesting. Yeah, I feel like I can look whatever direction I'm lying. I feel like I can look and see, but it's very hard for me to even know exactly what's going on in that state. So,
No, like again, I mean, I mean, this is a kind of a bit anecdotal, but I've read
yeah,
cases where people report that while they're in that state, their housemate came into the bedroom to pick up a book and goes out again and left the door open, and then when they wake up, they find that did really happen. And then other cases where they're exactly the same scenario, but when they wake up, the door's closed, and the housemate says, "No, I never came into the bedroom." So you've got this real weird mix of
yeah,
things that are really happening and things that aren't, and it's difficult to know which is which.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I've had situations where that's both of those versions have happened. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what Yeah, reality in that state is so odd and hard to comprehend what's actually happening, what's not happening.
Yeah,
All I know is
yeah,
I can't move and it sucks. So
yeah, and that's enough.
that's right. Oh my gosh. So I mean, yeah, it seems like a lot of people can have sort of different sort of aspects of that situation. And luckily I don't have the more bizarre versions. Um
Well,
so far so good at least.
I mean, am I allowed to use a rude word on your
Yes,
podcast?
you can go
Right.
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. No, well, because I've got a book coming out in March, which obviously I'm going to try and plug because I'm on your podcast.
Absolutely.
And it's called The Science of Weird Shit. And I've got a very big chapter on sleep paralysis with lots of these first-hand accounts.
Oh wow.
As I say, you know, they are absolutely terrifying, a lot of them, you know. And they, I mean, occasionally, I mean, I think one under-researched aspect of sleep paralysis is that sometimes they can be positive in terms of the emotion that's felt. It's usually it's more likely to be negative, but sometimes it can be positive. I think a lot of historical accounts of kind of being visited by angels may
Mm,
well be the positive version of sleep paralysis, because you know you've got that description of kind of being so awestruck and unable to move, but feeling that this being is benevolent, even though it's a little bit scary, but
yep.
it's ultimately benevolent. That strikes me as being quite likely to be positive episodes of sleep paralysis, and sometimes sleep paralysis episodes can turn into full blown out of body experiences, and people will then again more likely to describe those as being positive experiences. But yeah, it's we've still got a lot more to find out about sleep paralysis, but I
Yeah.
think in terms of the broad brushstrokes, we do know what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to see it's getting more attention and people like you have been researching it because I think, about even 10, 15 years ago when I first started to even like look up like what's going on with me, um, it was kind of strange not to find a lot of information about it. So it's
Yeah.
nice now that people are actually looking into it because makes it feel a little bit less weird that way. So
Yeah, one of the areas which is under researched, well, we've tried applying for grants and just we were never successful, is in terms of doing a proper outcome study of the best ways to cope with sleep paralysis, the best
mm,
strategies to adopt. Um, and I think part of the reason is because it's a very small minority of the population who have the really vivid version on a very regular basis. Um, but for those people, it really is a serious issue. But I mean,
yeah.
there's two aspects to this. One is what's the best advice to give in terms of reducing the frequency of episodes. And in a nutshell, there basically it's kind of sleep hygiene. Try to kind of go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. Don't have anything to, don't kind of have any substances that might interfere with
Yep.
the quality of your sleep just before you go into bed, etc., etc. Um, and the other question, I mean, there are other things that people try. You're much more likely to have an episode of sleep paralysis if you sleep on your back than in any other position. And
That's
so,
interesting.
yeah, no, that's true.
Huh.
And so
Wow.
some people, the same kind of thing that people try for snoring, they'll sew walnuts or something very hard into the back of their pajamas so that if they lie on the back, it's uncomfortable, and they lie on the side again. It's it might be worth trying. I don't know. But there's a few other things that different people try different things, but the other thing is how to cope with the episodes when they happen. A lot of people say, I know it's sleep paralysis when it's happening. I know what's going on. It's just some people adopt the strategy of just deciding to go with it. In the same way that
Yeah.
they might enjoy a good horror movie, they just kind of say, "Okay, here we go," and they learn to actually enjoy it.
Yeah.
Most people though say, "No, even though I know it's not real when it's happening, I can't do anything about the fear. It's absolutely terrifying."
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, then you get into the kind of strategies that people use to try to snap out of it. And the most common one is just to try and wiggle a finger or move an arm, or just, you know, if you can, by this huge effort of will, just make a
Yes.
limb or a finger move, you can break the spell. There's, you know, there are a few other approaches, but you know, we just don't know which are the most
Right.
effective. And you know, as I say, we were never able to actually get funding to do a proper study to find out.
Yeah, I mean that's so relatable. All those things you described, because it's I've dealt with that situation so many times. I mean, ironically, I don't sleep on my back. I actually sleep oftentimes on my stomach, and
Mm-hmm.
it feels worse when I have sleep paralysis on my stomach, just because I feel like I'm kind of stuck in an awkward position,
Yeah,
where maybe
yeah,
it's hard
and
to
you
breathe
can't, you
even.
don't know what's, yeah, you don't know what's going on behind you, kind of thing.
Well,
Like
yeah, and like I'm
that's
always worried, maybe I'll be stuck in a position where it's hard to breathe or something. Um, And yeah, it's just kind of uncomfortable. But I mean, yeah, for me, it is kind of like when I'm in that state, my blood pressure kind of spikes, I feel like, and I'm constantly just trying to move and like fight my way
yeah,
through it to wake up. Or I just hope like someone's gonna make a noise or something and it'll kind of snap me out of it. I almost wonder if people have like a I don't know, some type of button or something like that on their finger that they can like touch, maybe make a noise and wake.
yeah. Well, I mean, one thing, I mean, again, which is a very common thing to be reported, is people who have a partner sleeping next to them. You
Yeah.
know, the person who's having the sleep paralysis episode may be trying to scream at the top of their voice.
Yes. Yeah.
All that's coming out is, ah, you know. But if the person they sleep with learns to recognize that,
Yeah.
which quite often, you know, they can, and wake them up. I mean, it's very easy to wake someone up from an episode of sleep paralysis.
Yes.
Um, but you do need someone to just kind of touch you or shake you a little bit, you know, and then you'll snap out of it. So that, again, that's another kind of technique for people who sleep with a partner who knows them well enough to recognize that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
But that kind of feeling of wanting to be able to scream at the top of your lungs and nothing's happening, you know, it's yeah.
I mean, do we know like what the general time frame of an episode is? Because for me, it's impossible to keep track of time in that state.
That's a really good question, and I mean, again, I can't give you. I mean, there are very few kind of laboratory-based studies of sleep paralysis for the obvious reason that to do so would be very, very labor intensive, because even if you've got somebody who suffers from sleep paralysis on a regular basis, there's no guarantee that they're going to have an episode of sleep paralysis on the night that you've got them all wired up in the sleep laboratory. You know, I mean, I don't even have a sleep laboratory. I don't do that kind of research. We didn't have the
Right.
facilities. Um, but people have done it. And there's some really interesting Japanese work where they managed to actually induce episodes of sleep paralysis. And the way to do this, sleep paralysis episodes are much more likely to happen. I described before the typical pattern.
Sure.
When you go to sleep, you'll go through stage one, stage two, stage three, come back up into REM sleep. That's when if you might have an episode of sleep paralysis, but you're particularly likely to have an episode of sleep paralysis if for some reason you go straight from wakefulness into REM.
Mm.
And one way to induce that, to make it happen, is to if you've got someone in the sleep lab and you wake them up every time they go into REM sleep, then you get what's called a REM rebound effect. Yeah, we don't really know why people have REM sleep. We don't really know why people dream. You know, we know they
Yeah.
do. We know that if you deprive people of REM sleep, then you'll get this REM rebound effect whereby they're more likely to, rather than going through the other stages first and then coming back up and then going into REM, they'll go straight into REM. And they're
Mm.
much more likely to have an episode of sleep paralysis if they've got the underlying susceptibility. So we do know that, you know, but even then, it's not going to happen every night. So
Yeah.
when you think about the kind of, you know, the cost of having, you know, someone coming to the lab every night and somebody monitoring what's going on and staying awake all night, and you know, you may or may not get an episode of sleep paralysis. There's just kind of, as I say, been very little research that could answer that question of, well, how long does it really last? But we do know that, you know, you can wake people up so when you get this, it's called a sleep onset REM period. When you get that, obviously you can be videoing them. You know that there aren't any demons in the room with them.
Right, of
They're
course.
not being attacked by whatever. So we know it's a hallucinatory experience, because there'll still be people around who say, well, how do you know it's a hallucination? How do you know it's not really spirits that are attacking people? Well, that for me, that line of research kind of fairly convincingly shows that no, it's a hallucinatory experience, which is,
Right.
what I would have thought anyway. But yeah, there's, again, it'd be fascinating to be able um, to kind of get people into the sleep lab and do all that, but resource wise, it's quite expensive.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's only so much funding to go around, but I mean, yeah, that Japanese study, that sounds kind of relatable, because I feel like if I do get a poor night's sleep, and then take a nap the next day, and I'm very tired, I
Yeah,
fall asleep right away. That's when it happens
yeah,
most of the time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then it just becomes a question of like, okay, how long is this going to last? Because I don't want to be stuck in this position very long. So
No, I mean, it's quite interesting looking at the way that the kind of wider belief system kind of influences what people experience, because you've got, on the one hand, sleep paralysis imagery can be come from. I had a student, for example, sleep paralysis on quite a regular basis, and one episode he told me about, he'd fallen asleep, he'd woken up, and there was a black cat by the side of his bed hissing at him, and he couldn't move, obviously. So that'd be quite upsetting
yeah.
anyway. But this was not an ordinary black cat. Instead of an ordinary cat's head, it had an inverted cat's skull with with black goo dripping from the mouth. And you think,
Wow.
if you saw a painting of that by a surrealist painter, you'd think, oh, you need treatment. I mean,
That's that's wild.
it's a really, this a really weird image. So on the one hand, you can get the really idiosyncratic stuff. On the other hand, we do know that the belief system does influence what people might experience during sleep
Yeah.
paralysis. So, depending upon the particular type of demons that are believed in a particular culture, whereas somebody who's a Christian wouldn't have that kind of imagery, they'd have different
Yeah.
kinds of imagery. We do know that it does actually influence. A friend of mine who did some research on sleep paralysis, and his one of the people that he was dealing with, who suffered from sleep paralysis regularly, but had never heard about the link between alien abduction claims and sleep paralysis.
Mm.
And so, my colleague explained this to him. And that night, for the very first time during his episode of sleep paralysis, there was a little grey alien. It'd never been there before. He said even when it was happening, he knew exactly why it was happening, because that's what the conversation he'd had earlier in the day.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Wow.
but one of the most interesting, one of the funniest, to my mind at least, interpretations that I ever came across was, I'd done an interview for a radio program, and I was being driven back from the studio afterwards. And yeah, the driver kind of said, "Oh, what were you talking about?" And I said, "Oh, it was about sleep paralysis." And I explained it. So, "Oh yeah, I've had that." And his interpretation of this evil presence was his mother-in-law. Now, you dig a little bit
Oh.
deeper. It actually did make sense, because he was a Cypriot. I can't remember whether he was Greek or Turkish, but he was a Cypriot, and it wasn't actually his mother-in-law. It was his mother-in-law to be, because at the time
Ah.
he had the episode, he was in his future in-law's bed with their daughter, and premarital sex was a big no-no within
Oh
that
my.
cultural group. And obviously he'd woken up in the morning, not been able to move, felt this evil presence, and just assumed it must be his future wife's mother glaring at him.
Oh my gosh.
But it made sense in terms of the belief system, that was there. Nothing
Yeah.
paranormal. It was his mother-in-law. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess you never know what's going to pop up in those situations.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah. I feel much more normal now, given the circumstances.
This is what I'm here for.
So I'm curious now to talk more about your upcoming book. What inspired this new one, and what topics are you covering in it?
Um, I mean, basically, it's a book that I've been kind of wanting to write for probably a couple of decades, seriously. And the day job just kept getting in the way. I couldn't find the time to do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to write a popular science book about anomalistic psychology. Um, I got to a point where I kind of I had, as well as the kind of dealing with the science and all the interesting stuff, the topics, I kind of felt I had enough kind of funny stories to put in there as well to make it kind of engaging. So yeah, it covers a very wide range. There's a kind of general introduction as to what is anomalistic psychology and why I think it should be kind of taken more seriously. My original title for the book was going to be "Why Weird Stuff Matters," which I still think is a good title, because I think that by looking at all these kind of weird experiences, we can kind of draw more general lessons about how the mind works.
Yeah.
And it's really about kind of the way that belief affects lots of different types of cognitive processes. We're all biased by our prior beliefs. We all have prior beliefs that we bring to any situation, and whether we're talking kind of paranormal stuff or religious beliefs or political beliefs, or even which is your favorite kind of football team,
Yeah.
it will affect how you perceive a situation. So but yeah, I've then so in terms of the overall structure of the book, after the kind of general introductory stuff, you've got a nice long chapter on sleep paralysis, which I just find endlessly fascinating.
Yes.
Initially, I was going to have a chapter on ghosts, but that turned into two chapters because it was just there's
Too
just so
much to
much to
cover.
say, too much to cover. So there's one of those chapters is on kind of the psychology of ghostly encounters, and then the second chapter is on communication with the dead, various ways that people have tried to communicate with the dead. I've got chapters on the psychology of coincidence, a chapter on reincarnation claims. I've got a couple of chapters on the various tests of paranormal claims that we've done over the years. Have I missed anything there? I have a feeling I've missed at least one chapter out. I can't think. And then at the end, I've got an epilogue. I kind of as far as I was concerned, I'd finished writing the book and submitted it to the publisher, and then they send it out for kind of people to review. And they were all very nice about it, which was very nice. But one person did say, "Yeah, it might be nice to have something about the limits of skepticism." And my editor thought that was a good idea, and I tended to agree. I thought, yeah, actually, that'd be an interesting one to look in, to say something about. So the final it's not really a chapter, we'll call it an epilogue, is on the limits of skepticism, and which basically is exploring kind of, well, what would it take to make me change my mind?
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier, and it just so happened that suggestion had been made at a time when there were a couple of things that were happening in my life. One is that even though I've done lots of tests of paranormal claims over the years, never found any significant results in support of the paranormal claim, I kind of still keep on trying, because there's that thing about, well, I may be wrong, maybe I'm just not looking in the right place, and so I'm engaged at the moment. We're actually at the kind of judging phase in this study, but I'll explain what that means. Engaged in a study of whether or not lucid dreaming might be precognitive. Whether we've got a particular lucid dreamer. I'm doing this in collaboration with a scientist. I called her a parapsychologist once, and she didn't like being called that. She says she's a psychologist, but she does believe that dreams can predict the
Okay.
future.
Yeah.
So there's her and a lucid dreamer. This chap had got in touch with me when I was writing my book, and he's really interested. He's an artist, and so his USP is if you were to commission a picture from him, he would go to bed, go to sleep, start dreaming, and then he'd think, "Oh, I've got to do that picture for Ben." And then
Okay.
in his dream, he would take a pen, take a piece of paper, start drawing something, and then the picture just finishes itself off. He doesn't know what's going to be in it, which is kind of really weird,
That is
And then
interesting.
when
Okay.
he wakes up, he reproduces whatever was produced in the dream. So he's a really interesting character, and he was already collaborating with this. I'm going to say parapsychologist again, and hope she doesn't hear the podcast. uh, and he said, "Yeah, would you like to be involved?" So I said, "Yeah, sounds great." Now they'd already done one small scale pilot study and got just about significant results, and then we did another small scale pilot study, this time with me involved, and got just about significant results again, much to my surprise. And now we're doing the main. We've done the main study where he's had his dreams, and basically there's a judging process at the end that goes on. So we're waiting for the results of that to come in, and we'll see how it goes.
Wow.
Now, the question is, well, supposing the results came back suggesting yes, lucid dreaming really can be precognitive. How would I react? Well, I mean, I know that being a human being who's had a huge investment for a long time in being a skeptic,
Sure.
that I would probably kind of go, "Oh, wow, wasn't expecting that." I may not immediately decide, okay, yeah, precognition is real, but at least I'd hope I'd kind of say, well, okay, let's try and see if we can do it again. If we can, let's try
Sure.
it a few times and see if we can. So that was one thing that's kind of still ongoing, in fact. The other thing was that I was contacted by someone who sent me an email with the intriguing title, "Not a Ghost Story."
Okay.
And within the first few sentences was assuring me that she was not mad. She said, I'm Googleable in a good way. And I'm, I've got a family, I live happily, and I've got dogs, but basically, so I had some experiences that you might find interesting. And I kind of figured out who it was because she was Googleable, and I could see from her email address enough. And yes, she's, without saying who she is, she's a successful
Mhm.
writer,
Okay.
and yeah, perfectly respectable person. But she'd had some weird experiences. She'd been a skeptic and an atheist all her life, as was her partner. Her partner then tragically died,
Mm.
and since after that, she had quite a lot of kind of weird experiences that she interpreted as being signs from him.
Okay.
Without going into details, to the extent that she's now no longer an atheist, and she's totally convinced that life after
Yeah.
death is real.
Sure.
I know she writes very well, so I just kind of basically, with her permission, cut and pasted her emails into my epilogue, and that worked quite well. But the question I was asking was, again, it's one of those things where, yeah, okay, it's a really interesting story. I thought, but it happened to her. It didn't happen to me. But how would I respond if those things did happen to me?
Of course.
Would
Yeah.
I would I
Yep.
actually think, actually I've got to accept now that this must be paranormal? And I don't
Mhm.
know is the honest answer. I just don't know. I'm not one of those skeptics who says, "Oh, nothing could ever convince me."
Sure. Of course.
I mean, and it may be, some people argue that the paranormal is real, but you'll never demonstrate it under controlled conditions in a laboratory.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
because that's the evidence that would really convince me. If we could show telepathy under
Right.
controlled conditions in a reliably replicable way, yeah, fine, I'd accept that it was real. I'd kind of be really excited about that. But um, supposing it only ever happens in spontaneous real life situations, and that's just the nature of the beast,
Yeah.
then I'll probably, even though it might really exist, I'll probably never believe in it. So, but it kind of raised some interesting issues for me to think about. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, that makes sense. I mean, after all, if you sort of push the button enough times, you'll eventually get to something where no one can possibly scientifically study. So it's kind of a non-starter in terms of a conversation about reality. Um, you know,
yeah, yeah.
so
Well,
people, yeah.
one of the other things that I mentioned in this epilogue was that some people might say, "Oh well, she wasn't really a proper skeptic anyway."
Mm,
Now it's interesting that again, just about the time that I was kind of thinking about what to put in this epilogue, a book came out by a friend of mine called David Marks. Now, there's no question at all that he was a proper skeptic. He wrote one of the kind of classic skeptical books, basically kind of debunking Uri Geller, amongst other
yep.
kind of paranormal claims. He founded New Zealand Skeptics. He had a long history of being quite an outspoken and vocal skeptic. And he just published a book where he kind of reviews, all the kind of areas of paranormal research, parapsychology, and he's still not impressed by the results that are coming out from controlled studies. He still doesn't think that they're, but he's had a personal experience
Hmm.
that has convinced him that maybe, just maybe, the paranormal is real, and it's just based on personal experience,
Sure.
and so there's definitely a case where there's no way you could say he was not a proper skeptic. He
Right.
absolutely was, so it can happen even to him. So yeah, it leaves it nice and open.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, that's life, I guess.
yeah,
I think I think a lot of people also, as they get older, there's a segment of the population that I think becomes more religious with age, as people start to contemplate death more.
yeah,
Um, so, which is natural, I think, for people to start doing that. But I know my grandfather, wrote a lot of poetry throughout his life, and he had a situation where his first wife had died of cancer. Um, and from that point on, and also perhaps also the aging part of his life, I mean, he became much more religious as he got older. Um, so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of factors that life just kind of makes people feel more uncomfortable as you get older and things
yeah,
happen to you that you're trying to look for something to bring back that comfort. Um,
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's again, there's another anecdote that I tell in the book of one of the problems of being an atheist. I remember this incident where one of my daughters, she'd be about I don't know, 6, 7 years old, and she was sleeping on the top bunk, and I was sleeping on the bottom bunk. I mean, I presume that her younger sister probably wasn't well, and hence sleeping with my wife. And I'm kind of lying there, and suddenly she lets out this kind of really heart-rending sob from the very depths of her soul, And I kind of shot up. I said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" Said, "I don't want to die." And I said, "You don't need to worry about that. You've got your whole life ahead of you." "Yes, but I will die, won't I?" I said, "Well, here's me kind of super skeptic, super atheist.
yeah.
Well, some people believe that when you die, you go to heaven." And "Yeah, but you don't, do you?" it's, it's a fair cop. It can be
uh,
hard to be an atheist.
Yeah.
She kind of completely had me there. No, I don't. No.
I guess you have to
But
come up with a better answer next time for that
yeah,
question.
yeah,
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
I think, yeah, the contemplation of death. Well, I mean, it's also funny just to, sort of talk about, and people, gosh, I've had conversations with people, all the time about sort of death, and there's so much fear about death, but also the fear, people that are like, oh, I just want to live forever. And, the question of like, is it even worth living forever? That sort of debate that
yeah,
goes on philosophically. But, I've heard like, there's even scientists that will talk about, it's like, well, it depends on how you look at death, I guess. The energy and matter of the universe is still, sort of floating
yeah,
around. So
yeah,
depends on how, I guess, how much you want things to be the same, or if you're willing to just kind of go with the flow of the universe, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, basically, one of the things. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but we all forget it. Is that you didn't have any problem before you were born.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
it's gonna be like that.
Yeah. That's
It's
right.
kind of,
I mean,
yeah. But there is that whole thing of. I mean, again, I mean, in terms of philosophy of mind,
yeah.
I don't think we're anywhere near understanding the nature of consciousness. It's
No.
it's
No.
it's called the hard problem for a reason.
Yep.
Because it's hard. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I tend to kind of go along with, the typical kind of neuroscientist approach, materialistic approach that consciousness is entirely dependent upon what's happening in the substrate of the brain.
Hmm.
But, that doesn't really get you very far in terms of actually really understanding it.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I mean, I think that's for some people, I think that is the attraction of parapsychology, because you've got any kind of evidence for
Yeah.
life after death
Yeah.
totally undermines the materialist position. It's got to be a dualist explanation of some
Yeah.
sort.
Yeah.
Uh, Whether we're talking about reincarnation or well, any evidence for, as I say, for life after death. I've just been taking part in a. It's been quite an experience. There was a successful program on Radio 4 in the UK called Uncanny, which is basically people telling their own personal ghost stories.
Mm.
And it did really, really well. It ended up kind of there've been 3 TV specials now, and we've just finished a theatre tour. We've been going up and down the country doing stuff on in theatres. The last gig that I did was 1,400 people in the audience at
Wow.
a theatre in Glasgow. It's been quite an experience. And one thing it really brought home to me is that lots and lots of people have had weird experiences.
Oh yeah.
This is
Yeah.
not this is not a kind of a rare thing, and it's quite nice to kind of give people permission to talk about it. I
Yeah.
mean, whatever's going on, there's something interesting going on there. And it might be that some of this stuff genuinely is paranormal, or it might just be that it's telling us something really interesting about the way the human mind works. But either way, it's worth listening to and taking seriously.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I find, your work and some of the other skeptics' work, so fascinating because, we often get, kind of overwhelmed with the politics of the world and sort of the kitchen table issues of life, just trying to provide for family. But in the background of all this, the number of people that believe in something supernatural or have had some experience they claim to be supernatural, it's incredible how many people.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
and this is something that we just kind of, we don't have classes in school about sort of critical thinking and trying to understand these aspects of life that occur on a regular basis with every single person, basically. When we should. I mean, this should be something that
yeah.
people talk about more often.
Well, this is, I mean, again, the kind of the main kind of presenter of the podcast, and it's is a guy called Danny Robbins, and his bit of his spiel at the end of the stage show that we're doing is kind of the he says for him, the reason he's so interested in kind of ghosts is that they're the antidote to fear of death.
Ah, okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, which kind of, yeah, I can kind of see where he's coming from. Although the kind
Yeah.
of idea of ghosts is for most people a bit of a scary idea, it does provide some kind of evidence for the possibility that when we die, that's not the end of us.
Yeah.
And even more so, perhaps, when our loved ones die, that's not the end of them. The
Yeah.
idea that people you love, when they go, they've gone forever. It's not a nice idea. It's uncomfortable. We
Yeah.
wish it were so.
I mean, I think it's all the heart of all these things in the supernatural realm and religion is it's all about hope, and trying to find some type of hope for, what happens when you die. I mean, well, I think about it historically. I try to, I talk to people about because it is, I mean, it's hard to find people, a person that's not concerned about death or hasn't thought about death,
Yeah,
um, given that's kind of inherent in our nature. But
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like you're not being erased from history when you die. Like you still existed at one point in time, and you can make arguments about what existence is after death if you're going down to the particle level of like, oh, well, the matter
Yeah.
and energy that represent us is still around, whatever. um so yeah, I guess it just kind of depends on how specific. If people want to be themselves and nothing changes, then it's gonna be tough, I think. But but
Yeah. Yeah.
um yeah, it's just one of those things about life that no easy answer for. So
Nope. And we've just got to live with it.
but
But
hopefully your book provides some clarity about just the thought process of going through these things and thinking about them critically. So
well, yeah, I hope so. Obviously, I'm kind of coming at it from a particular perspective, which may or may not be right. But it's very much kind of seeing how far can we push. I mean, the working hypothesis of anomalistic psychology is to say, let's just, as a starting point, assume that paranormal forces don't exist. Can we explain the kind of experiences that people have and the kind of beliefs that they have?
yeah.
And in particular, can we explain them in terms of kind of psychological biases and things that we know about, things that are already established? And I think we can do a kind of pretty reasonable job. I wouldn't say for one second that we can provide conclusive explanations for every single paranormal experience. That'd be ridiculous. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of just weigh up the evidence as you see it.
Hmm.
And I mean, the kind of my book finishes with a quotation from someone else, but based on an idea from William James that you got tough-minded people and tender-minded people, and for someone who adopts that kind of skeptical, critical thinking type approach, the quality of the evidence that would convince you that maybe some paranormal claims are true would have to reach a very, very high standard.
Yeah.
Because your love of the truth is so great that you don't want to accept anything as being true unless it's reached that standard.
Right.
A tender-minded person, their love of the truth is so great that they're willing to accept some stuff that won't be true, but they'll make sure they catch everything that is true, all the
Mm.
ideas that and it's really a matter of where you just set the criterion.
Yeah.
It's and none of us really know where that is. But if you're going to adopt this skeptical, critical thinking, scientific approach to life, then you may end up missing out on some things that are true. But it's a
Yeah.
price you're going to have to be prepared to pay. If you are, much more kind of open and you're accepting kind of various new age type claims and all kinds of other stuff, then yeah, you'll make sure you don't miss anything that's true, but you'll also accept a lot of stuff that isn't true.
Yeah, that's
So
true. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see just how much sort of things shift over time with each generation to come, because
Yeah.
you kind of get new sort of maybe some new pseudoscience that pops up, or new paranormal claims that pop up or come back over time, and um, yeah, and especially in the United States, I mean, the influence of politics now on so much of science and just societal issues in general. I think you know the sort of the barrier between who's a skeptic and who's not about things, I think, is kind of becoming more murky now. So
Yeah.
you just depends on what you're talking to them about, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that kind of anti-science strand that's there in American politics and in the UK politics to some extent as well, but very much so with American politics on the right wing in particular,
Yes, of
um,
course.
is well very, very, very worrying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we
Uh,
live in interesting times.
yes. Well, hope for the best. And just finishing up, what's the best way for people to follow your work?
I'm on Twitter. I'm not going to call it Hex. I'm on Twitter as Chris C. French. My middle name's Charles. I have a website which is desperately in need of updating, but I will get around to it soon, which is profchrisfrench.com. And anybody that, I mean, if anybody's kind of got any particular kind of queries, my email address is c.french@gold.ac.uk. And yes, my book is available for pre-order now. The Science of Weird Shit. It's available on Satan's own website, but it will be available on the MIT Press website from the 19th of December.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks again for coming on and sharing all your knowledge and research. And it's been really fascinating. So
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.